team or whatever it's called, the staff.
Well, we're live now on the internet, so we're good.
I don't know if he has a staff.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Bob the Father. So again, this is a open forum. Any questions you might have, please feel free. So anyone?
Sure.
Yeah.
I had a question come up at the women's prayer group
Great.
last week. The sequence.
Mhm.
Where does it come from? And why do we only do it so?
Yeah. Okay. Good.
twice?
A sequence is actually something that's more common in the extraordinary form. So a sequence is actually poetry, right? So if you look at the actual sequences themselves, whether it be for Easter, whether it be for Pentecost, whether it be for Corpus Christi or Our Lady of Sorrows, those are really the four main days
Okay.
where a sequence is traditionally used. It's only required on Easter and Pentecost.
Two. Yeah.
So sequence is really just poetry that is kind of used to underscore the highlight what's going on for that particular day, right? Sequences are actually more common in the extraordinary form. So if you go to the extraordinary form of the Mass, especially on Holy Days of Obligation or solemnity, or a lot of even solemnities, it's more kind of more days of higher solemnity because they don't have solemnities necessarily in the extraordinary form. You're probably more common to hear a sequence in place of what they call a tract, or maybe in place of what they call the responsory, right? So sequences are more kind of poetic things. They kind of follow in the same suit of like a psalm.
The Pentecost one was beautiful.
Sure,
Let
sure.
the dew fall upon
Right,
us. and
right.
It was, but I couldn't answer the question
Yeah.
where they came.
Yeah, so they come from the actual ancient form of liturgy that,
Wow.
and even they predate even that of the extraordinary form. So tract sequences are kind of more common in the more ancient liturgies that kind of have been preserved in the Novus Ordo on particular days like Easter, Pentecost, that kind of thing. So that's kind of what they are. They're more kind of works of ancient poetry that have been preserved
To
through
enhance
generations.
the reading.
Well, enhance more the kind of the day
Response?
before. Well, it's not. There are responses. They're really just kind of sequences and tracks. Traditionally, aren't just like responsorials, but they would follow typical readings to kind of highlight the particular day of the saint, whatever was
Kind
going
of
on.
elevate the mass a little bit.
In some
just a little-
ways.
make it a little more
In some
special.
ways, yeah. I mean, so they could be used interchangeably with a responsorial or with like what they call a tract. So tracts, like a responsorial psalm, tracts are never like, they're not really, even the responsorial psalm in the extraordinary form is not said by the congregation. That's usually done by the choir. It's done by, a cantor. In the extraordinary form of the Mass, which also kind of follows suit with like the Julian liturgy or even the Gregorian liturgy, it's always usually done by a minister in the sanctuary. The congregation is there more as observers. So the idea behind a lot of these is that if you go to the extraordinary form, is probably the best example we have today of how this kind of worked. The role of the congregation is there to pray, right? To actually what we call actively participate. That's not like praying along, it's following the different postures. Is actually an internal disposition that's offered, right? That got kind of lost over time, and that's really why the reform of Vatican II kind of came about, was that there's kind of an understanding like, well, the congregation isn't really doing that anymore. They're praying their rosaries, which that could be a form of that, but they're not necessarily paying attention to what's going on in the liturgy, and many of them don't even understand what's going on in the liturgy. So they're not really participating in that respect. So the Novus Ordo was kind of a way to re-engage the faithful in participation in the liturgy more actively, right? We talk about that in some ways about the difference between like activism and active participation, but throughout the generations, active participation has always been known as internal disposition directed towards what's going on. So one of the ways that it's done is through the sequence, and it's not necessarily meant to be sung by the congregation. It's really meant to be received by the congregation, which is why even in our liturgy in the Novus Ordo, we don't sing along with it, right? The sequence is not meant to be sung in choir or sung along with. It's meant to just be received. And the purpose of it is to underscore what's going on for that particular day in the celebration.
Should it be sung and not read,
Well,
recited?
ideally, yes, right? But in the Novus Ordo, it gives the option, right? So even in the extraordinary form, you wouldn't necessarily sing everything either. If you went to, let's say, a low mass on Easter Sunday, even in the extraordinary form, they wouldn't necessarily sing the sequence, depending which mass you went to. They would just you may not even notice it, but the celebrant would, or the deacon or the subdeacon would just
I
proclaim
have
it.
trouble wrapping my head around a low mass on Easter.
Well, low masses can be done. I mean, every Sunday. I mean, that's the thing. See, so that's the thing. We have a different understanding in the ordinary form because of these kind of levels of memorial, feast, solemnity. In the extraordinary form, it's just we have this day. We're going to celebrate these different masses, and that's kind of preserved even today. Like for instance, the 8 o'clock mass here at St. Anne. That could be something akin to a low mass, and even on Easter Sunday, we may have sung Hallelujah. We didn't necessarily sing anything else, right?
Right.
Okay, there's nothing wrong with that.
Choir.
But in the same way, if you went to the extraordinary form on Easter Sunday, they probably would have had a low mass option that wouldn't have had a choir. It would just be maybe you have a subdeacon and a deacon, maybe, right? But that would be just said, and the sequence would be said as well, right? So yes, the intention there is that it's sung. But the rubric would state it should be said or sung, depending, right? And that is prescribed.
So where can a lay woman like me go to find information about this, like when it started and the history of it? And
Well, I mean,
tough question.
yeah, I mean, so that's what I'm saying. You're talking about these ancient forms of the masses that are like even
Go to
today.
Scrolls.
We never, we know. I mean, so for that point, like we never like in seminary studied like the Julian Mass or the Gregorian Mass, right?
Okay.
Because they're not in practice. You may say the roots come from this,
Mhm.
but as far as like if you're looking for like a textbook that said here's how the Julian Mass went, there's really
here's
not
the
much out there.
History of the sequence.
Yeah, I mean,
When
you could maybe
started.
find something out there, maybe, but I think you'd be hard pressed to find something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I heard on the radio it started around the year 1000.
That's probably true.
But it's like, well, how did that person know?
Well, I mean, but you notice
Well,
the word they use is probably because
Why don't you
because
email one
well,
too?
but-
Maybe one
well,
too.
well, because here's the thing we tend not maybe realize that as ancient as the Mass is, there was different forms of the Mass
Right.
all over the place,
Yes.
even in the Western Church. So, like in the early parts of the church, let's say like 4th century, you may have had, depending on where you are in a certain area, you may have had, depending on who the bishop was, you might have had slight differences between the way your priest celebrate Mass and maybe even the diocese just across the way would
Mhm.
celebrate Mass. There was not like a standard form when it came to the rite. You always had the same structure. You'd have liturgy of the Word, liturgy of the Eucharist. You typically would have at least one reading. The gospel is always proclaimed. Some kind of response to the introductory rites, which is more kind of sometimes the prayer was made up on the spot by the celebrant. Then you had the offertory. You had the liturgy of the Eucharist, where the bread and water was offered. It was blessed. You entered in the Eucharistic prayer. That was always been the highlight, the epitome of the Mass was the Eucharistic prayer, where the bread and wine becomes the body and blood. Distribution, if people were eligible. That's another thing. Sometimes the Eucharist was not given communally because, well, nobody's able to. Okay, great. And then you'd have the dismissal. But the way that was done and maybe the words that were used, well, it could have been different from just church to church or diocese to diocese, depending on what the bishop knew or how they understood it, or even what the priest would do. So that wasn't really standardized until probably about the 6th century, where the church started to expand. And so going to these more pagan territories. And so there was kind of a question from these mendicant missionary orders about, well, we're trying to, evangelize and bring this into these areas like Britain and Germany and all these other places. So even as early as like the 5th century, how do we do that? Okay, well, what's the Pope do? How does he do it in the papal mass? Well, that's what he does. Okay, well, that's what we're going to do, right? And then the next Pope might come, like, well, I do these things. Oh, okay, that's what we're going to do. So these things would kind of evolve over time. Gregory is probably known to be and he was, again, this was probably, 7th, 8th century, to actually more standardize it for the universal church in the West. But exactly what he did is also like, well, we don't really know today for sure, right?
It wasn't written?
Well, it was written, but it wasn't like, you didn't have like necessarily a standard missal, that people had today, right? You had mostly instruction, and it's like, well, here's some Gregory. He's a lot of singing, a lot of chanting. Okay, great. How does he chant? Where? Who chants? So that's kind of how it was until about Trent. And so Trent really kind of has the first time where we have one standardized form of the West where that's what we're going to do universally. Okay, cool. And that we have today.
So in the West, you're talking all the countries that.
I'm talking about the Latin rite
The Latin
of the
rite,
Catholic
okay.
Church. So the other rites, they also kind of evolved over time. But again, and that we kind of see that coming about around the same time where there was like, hey, we're in Russia, so we celebrate a little bit differently. That's kind of been the universality of the church, is that you go to a mass or liturgy and you're going to experience the same structure, but how it's done is going to be different if you go to the Byzantines compared to the Maronites, compared to the Latins, compared to everything else, right? And so, yeah, when Fiducia Supplicans came out, that was kind of one of the arguments that the Pope Francis was making against having two forms, is that this is kind of novel in the Western Church. In some ways, yes, but in many ways, no, right? Since Trent, yeah. You can even make an argument since Gregory. Okay, sure. But even after Gregory, there were certain different variations. There were different evolutions that would occur, so that were incorporated. But again, they're always sanctioned by Rome. Rome only said, yeah, okay, that's fine, or no, that's kind of off limits. But those evolutions will also happen over time too. So as far as if you want like a source, if you find one, great. Let me know. But I mean, it's
Well,
sort
you know
of
this much about it, so something.
yeah, and
written
this is coming from our seminary classes, but like I can't pinpoint you in a textbook
Okay.
as where that was,
Okay.
right? So,
Okay.
and this is really coming more from someone who's actually gone to the Vatican Library and kind of seen the scrolls where these things are written, right? But as well as like, but there's not really a textbook that was like, here's what the scroll says.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
I have a question about another mass part.
great.
At the beginning, there's the collect.
Collect, yeah.
Well, first of all, how do you say it? What does that word mean, and who composes them?
Yeah, collect. Yeah, so the collect is
Oh,
it basically means what it says. You're collecting the prayers of all the people gathered and uniformly offering them up to the Father. So the words of the collect are the prayer of the people being offered by the representative of the high priest, who's the priest, which is designated by the oral position of the minister, right? So whenever you see the priest doing this, he's offering prayer to the Father as the mediator between God and man. Right? So the collect themselves were written, the ones we currently use in the Novus Order were written pretty much after Vatican II. Right? They kind of came out of Vatican II. They were translated in 1970, and they were retranslated in 2011. Right? So the words of the collect, the words of the Mass came from the Fathers of Vatican II. The translations came from the different bishop conferences, and specifically the ones that speak English. So the bishop conferences that speak English, United States, Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, they consolidated to actually say, here's what we're going to do. In 2011, Pope Benedict authorized a interpretation, relooking at those words to ensure they're actually in line with the meaning of English, right? Or I should say they're more in line with the meaning in Latin.
Bring it back to the.
Right, the original Latin,
original.
right. So who wrote those prayers? I couldn't tell you, right? Whether it was like a particular cardinal or bishop writing those, it was kind of a group effort. And so those kind of came out of the Vatican II. They were given to the different bishop conferences to translate. And then that's what we have today.
They don't really always flow.
Yeah, and some of them, I mean, there was one that always, every time it comes up, it always kind of gives me a little bit of a stir. And I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but it's just like, it's something that's sort of like, I think is it for Trinity Sunday? It's just something that's sort of like, ooh, that, I don't know if that really is in line with the full theology of how we understand it, but it's like something you kind of get as you're reading along, you're like, you say it and they're like, but that's what we're given, right? So yeah.
The prayers usually like a certain format, like praising God and then asking for something like the Jewish Baruch.
Yeah, I mean, there always are aspects of those liturgical prayers, meaning like the collect, the prayers over the gifts, and then the prayer for communion, that have those aspects of it. I mean, every prayer has some kind of supplication, but the point of the collect is to offer at the beginning of the Mass, offer all the prayers of the faithful to God the Father, right? And they're expressed through the words that were given by Holy Mother Church, right? So that's kind of the idea behind it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, just like today's was, "Oh God, from whom all good things come, grant that we who call on you in our need."
Mhm.
So it's giving praise to God and then asking, and isn't that how most Jewish prayers start?
Yeah, I mean, that's how most prayers incorporate. I mean, so we think of prayer, you're thinking of acclamation, like praise. You're thinking of contrition, like I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Thanksgiving, thank you for what you do, and then supplication. Can you give us something, right? So yeah, I mean, those are kind of this. That's kind of the standard structure of like what we call a rote prayer, but they can also flow into like meditative or contemplative prayer. Sure.
What I remember is when we prayed for unfailing health of mind and body.
Mm-hmm.
Who thinks that's going to happen?
Well, so again, we're looking at these. I think we're looking at that from the perspective of the limited material, right? With the prayers are meant to be looking at the eternal and at the end. Right? So in heaven, yeah, we will, right? Right. So in heaven, sure, right? So basically, what that's saying is, help us get to heaven, right? That's kind of what the aspect of that is. Right. So yeah, I mean, so
it could happen, but
well, right. I mean, so is it possible to have an unfailing mind and body here on earth? Sure.
For a while.
Right. I know. Right. And so yeah, you're right because we're limited. This life is limited. It won't. It can only happen in heaven, right? So all these prayers we're talking about are looking at the eternal rather than the material, right? So we kind of have that mindset too, right? Especially if we're directing something to an eternal being. Well, we can't offer something that's just so limited. Yeah, only He can do that. Only God the Son can do that to God the Father through the God the Spirit, which is what's happening in these prayers. The priest is standing in the persona Christi through the power of the Holy Spirit, offering these things to the Father, right? So even the words themselves are words of Jesus. Yeah. Good.
So are sequence limited to just those few times?
In the Novus Ordo, yes.
Okay.
Right. So I mean, okay.
I mean, could you add one?
Yeah, could you add a
or-
sequence at any?
Yes.
Technically, yeah.
Okay.
With a reservation. So, in let's say a ferial day, like today. Today was a ferial day. We didn't have any saint on the calendar. There was no special day today. It was just it was the Tuesday of the 10th week of ordinary time. In the Ordo, it says any mass, right? So you can incorporate these kind of more solemn parts. Let's say it's not okay. Well, for instance, today also is the anniversary of the appointment of Archbishop Rosansky.
Mhm.
So in his honor, we could say we're gonna add a sequence or maybe a second reading, make it a little more solemn, right? Sure, right? But on certain days, like on days, let's say Advent, Lent, these more high solemn days, it wouldn't be proper to do that. And when we talk about liturgy, it's hard because it's not necessarily should and shouldn't. It's what's most proper and what isn't, right? So as a celebrant, you're looking at these things saying, okay, well, okay, so today being a ferial day, I mean, I think I was going to celebrate a Christmas Mass. Why not? It says in the Mass in the Ordo, so cool, right? Okay, definitely valid and even licit, but would it be proper, right? Because what does June 10th of 2025 have to do anything with the birth, well, with the season of Christmas? Right.
At least wait till July.
Right. So again, I mean, it's one of these things where it's like, what is the reason behind it? And sometimes only the person knows it is a celebrant, right? So, and maybe just that's my personal preference, which is totally legitimate. But also, what's more efficacious for the people? And if I was celebrating a private Mass, well, maybe I could make the argument like, I really love Christmas. I'm feeling very festive today. I'm going to do that. But a public Mass, I need to be more kind of understanding of what's best for the congregation to help them grow spiritually, what's best to help them receive spiritually. So that doesn't necessarily mean I won't do something that is maybe a preference, but the reason being is like, well, maybe, this would be beneficial for the people that I'm celebrating Mass for, right? Or even the intention I'm celebrating for. So all these things could be more internal to the celebrant, not necessarily explicit, right? And then the trick is, though, sometimes bring that up again would be like, what do we do again? Maybe I don't remember, maybe whatever. So to that end, I'll just say, again, it comes down to not necessarily what's right or wrong. It's what's more proper and what's not to the particular day or celebration. So yeah, could you ask? Sure, but why?
Okay.
And if you're going to add a sequence, well, what? That's kind of another factor too, right? I mean, you could go back to the historian forms like, well, hey, they used to do this on like the Tuesday after Pentecost. Okay, and that could be completely legit to do, and even bring that sequence into the liturgy, and even maybe do it in Latin, whatever. But again, it comes down to, is that the most proper for what's going on in the season or this particular day? Yeah. I mean, technically, you could add a second reading name Mass you want too, but the same thing would apply. Why? I mean, I have my reason. And if I'm the celebrant, that's my reason. But I don't necessarily have to divulge it to anybody either.
Okay. It's the perks. There's not very many of them.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, that's maybe one of them. Yeah, I don't know. Good. Yeah, because I mean, when it comes to the sequence too, in English we only have translations for those 5.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, well, could I incorporate the sequence for Pentecost? Yeah, I could. I mean, it's so close to Pentecost, you could probably make that argument. I mean, I don't know if I would though, because again, it's kind of a ferial day, and it's like,
Just curious.
Yeah.
I have a question. What was the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to you as a priest?
Ooh, and do you want to share?
Let's see, what would be, I don't know. There's been so many, it's hard to imagine.
Really?
It happened. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen. Like, I don't know. That's a difficult question. I might have to think about that.
Okay.
As a priest, I don't know.
Have you gone to the wrong church yet?
No,
Okay.
nothing like that. No. What? Maybe. Let's see. Was there something? I don't. Maybe something happened with like, it was like a. Oh well, but I don't know if this is embarrassing, but this was sort of like it was a decision. I was I got a knock on my door early in the morning on a Sunday morning, and I come out to find one of my roommates, my fellow priest, on the ground in front of my door, bleeding. And I'm like, so he says, I have to celebrate 6:30 mass. Go celebrate the mass. And I'm in like shorts and a t-shirt. I'm just like, okay, whatever. So I'm like, well, wait, so I'm trying to like, do you need help? What's going on? And I already have someone coming. What? Okay, fine. So I run out. So I showed up in like a t-shirt and shorts to celebrate mass. That might be so far.
That would be embarrassing.
That would be-
Well, yeah, that was I was like, okay, and, of course they had best don't do, but like the person showing me was like, I don't know what's going on, Monsignor. So it was just a bad situation. Yeah, that might be the most embarrassing so far. I don't know if there's any. I don't know.
You've never completely run out of posts.
Oh well, yeah, but I don't know if that's really embarrassing. It's just more of like a miscalculation. It's like I don't necessarily get embarrassed by that. It's just like I don't know. I figured, and sometimes it's because more people show up than you expect. Right? It's like I don't know. Yeah, right. So whatever. That's happened several times to me. Sure. I don't know if it's really embarrassing. Just more. Okay, I'll just make sure I put more next time. Or
Well, and you can kind of tell if a whole bunch.
yeah,
come
Yeah.
in, and you know what you had set out.
right. But sometimes it's hard to gauge though.
Yes.
Because what tends to happen sometimes, this happens more often than people think. By the time you get to the point of the offertory, usually you might have a standard number. But sometimes you have some people that come in and then they present themselves for communion, and it's like, unless I have a reason not to, it's sort of like, on Sundays might be a little more egregious, but on like, weekdays, it's sort of like, well, I mean, this isn't obligatory, and technically you did come, so should you present yourself for communion? There's a lot of factors here when it comes to those things, right? I mean, in general, this is kind of hard too. I remember this conversation in my former parish, actually about the father. It was kind of brought up as like, what's the minimum? Like, what do you have to do to actually like, well, did we talk about this here?
I think it wasn't about the father. Because
Okay.
I just got done reading it in the catechism.
Yeah, because I think it's sort of,
In RCI.
I don't know. I mean, because I think it's probably happened several times. But there's always this question about like, what's the minimum? What do I got to do to say I went to mass, right? Well, technically, showing up is going to mass. Now, the different question might be, what's the minimum I should do to receive communion? That's a completely different question, right? You should hear a reading, and you should be there present for the consecration in order to receive the
Fast for
Eucharist.
1 hour.
Well, I mean, all that's implied. What I'm saying though is like, okay, what parts of the mass do you need to be witness for?
So if you're late, how late?
Yeah, how late can you be and still receive the Eucharist, right?
What's the reason?
Right. Well, exactly. And so even within that, let's say, okay, you know what? My car broke down, and it was the last mass of the day, and I ended up running, and I made it, and it was right at the offertory. Okay.
You didn't sin.
Right. I mean, you did what you could do, right? That's a little different than, I just slept in and I got kind of lazy, and so, I showed up and it was already at the Our Father. Okay, well, you may have fulfilled your obligation by coming at least, so I'll give you that, but you should not present yourself for the Eucharist in that regard, right? And so sometimes, it's difficult because, like, if someone's coming, let's say I see someone coming in at the Our Father and they come for communion, having a conversation right then and there might be difficult. I might just say, "Can I talk to you after Mass?" Right? I know I've talked to several priests, and there's at least one person I think in every parish where you kind of have that happen. And it's not necessarily for the Sunday Mass; it's probably more for the daily masses. And if it was one or two times, you kind of like, all right, whatever. But if it happens consistently, I think you have an obligation to say, like, hey, I noticed this. I don't want to call you out, but also, like, we need to have a conversation, like, what's going on? And there could be legitimate reasons. Okay, again, the daily mass is not obligatory. But the fact you're coming, that does show some commitment. So fine. But it kind of depends. But yeah, the Mass obligation is different than receiving communion. So I showed up to Mass, I came in, I walked out. Good. Met your obligation, congratulations. Right? You know, I came in right as the sign of peace was happening, I presented myself for the Eucharist.
Yeah, but the Mass is for you, not for you to just skate by. It's for you to build your.
Well, yeah, ideally. Well, see, that's
your
that's
relationship
and,
with
well, and see,
Christ.
that's part of the struggle too, because the church doesn't envision like a minimum,
Right.
right? I mean, the idea there is that every part of the Mass is something that's efficacious for you. So if you can, you should be at every part of it,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But I mean, circumstances matter though too, and the church understands that. But she's not as explicit to say, "This is it. That's the cutoff," right?
Well, I think it goes just like you said, if it's habitual. It's
Right.
a different story than if it's a time or two here.
Well, even like talking about what's written, what's going on there, right? You won't find anything really written anywhere. It says like, okay, here's the minimum even to receive the Eucharist, because it's understood like this is something that should be the entire thing should be done, right? So even that is sort of open interpretation, right? And so like that's firstly, it's just me. It seems like the Masses consisting of the liturgy of the Word and liturgy of the Eucharist, it seems you should be there for the most important part, would be the gospel and the consecration. That's just more of a logical thing, right? I have not heard an argument, that's kind of compelling against that. But as far as your Mass obligation, hey, you came in and left, okay, great, you fulfilled your obligation for the Holy Day, good.
It's an hour.
Right.
Well, John,
So
that's
that's
no
my-
look.
I mean,
Right.
No, there's definitely like a level of like, yeah,
The
well,
clock is not even-
right. There's definitely a level
should
like
enjoy
you
it.
should, yeah.
If
I
you're
mean,
not enjoying all the parts of the Mass, then maybe you should look within yourself.
Correct.
I think there's some truth there, but I mean, but I think a lot of people look at minimalism, right? And so, if you really want to get technical, sure, but in the same breath, it's like, but this is meant for your application. So it's not just like I checked my box. Well, if that's what you're doing, then good luck to you, I guess. I mean, sure, you're doing that, but if you're not growing your relationship with Jesus, then maybe you should look interiorly and see what's going on there.
My mom would tell me when I was a little boy,
Yeah.
God gives you 168 hours every week. Give
Right.
him one back.
Yeah.
Give him one.
Yeah.
One. That's all he wants is one.
Well, I mean, it's so funny when you talk to the kids in the school. You bring that. I bring up all the time. You're like, how many hours are in a week? I was like, I don't know. I was like, let's calculate it. I got 24 hours a day, and then 7 days. So we calculate. It's like 168. Okay, how long does Mass usually last?
45 minutes
If
on a
that-
if that,
If that.
45 minutes.
It's like, let's say an hour. Just say an hour, just to be fine.
Easy math.
Easy math, right? So that's 167 hours a week you have, and God's only asking for one.
Seems fair.
When you put it in that perspective, the kid's like,
Right?
That makes sense, yeah. So I mean,
Unreasonable.
right. So I think the logic is definitely there. The practice is really where it comes in the problem, right?
Yeah.
Because I think some of the struggle we have with especially with children, and this is why like even in the confessional, I think I'm a little more lenient with the kids, because like if they confess missing Mass, let's say, my first question would be, well, can you get to Mass by yourself?
No.
If the answer to that is no, well, it's like, well, maybe the best you can do is ask your parents to take you. And if they say no, that's really on them, not on you. The struggle there becomes like, at one point, does a habit establish? Because then I'm kind of quick to say, well, at some point, it's going to be your responsibility. And so, when is that? Maybe it's when you start driving. I don't know.
Depends on where you live.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's even the same like with high school kids, like hearing confessions with high school kids. I mean, you hear that all the time. Yeah, I don't go to every Mass. I'm like, well, can you go to Mass by yourself? Well, yeah. Well, then, okay. Then what's the problem? Then we start shifting to maybe like, instead of like, I typically say this in a confessional when it comes to these things, like, especially if you can, like, well, I can understand that the homily may be boring and the reading's dry and the music probably less than desirable. But that's not where we go. Because I think part of that's understanding what the value is, right? The value is you become present to these actions of Jesus, that you become present to his passion, death, and resurrection. Become witness of that in the Mass. And if you're in a state to, you get to receive God into yourself. You can't do that anywhere in the universe except for at Mass. So if you're looking from that perspective, yeah, maybe I can look at that in a different way, right? I know one of my brother priests, he says sometimes, like, when people talk about being bored, he's like, well, just be bored then.
Right.
What's wrong with that? Right. So I think that's a good response,
It is a good response.
personally,
So did you ever get in a zone or anything and like forget and say like the Hallelujah during Lent or any of those parts? That
Not
don't always
yet.
apply?
I haven't done that yet. I think, actually the time where it's probably more hard to maintain that is actually Liturgy of the Hours. Because when you're praying Liturgy of the Hours by yourself, you might think it in a minute, it's like, because you get into it, like especially like the first few days. Well, because like every other day outside of Lent, you start, I come to my assistance, Lord, make his help me believe the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, as was in the beginning, is now, and ever, and will be forever. Amen. Alleluia. It just flows, right? It just flows. And then, so like when Ash Wednesday rolls around, it's like, world without end. And
Say that.
or you're not saying, you're thinking it, and it's like, so it's like, until like, you can wrap yourself against the knuckles or whatever. And technically that would be matter for confession, right? Because that is, I've promised to celebrate the Liturgy of the Hours diligently, right? And so is that really diligent? It's not intentional, I wouldn't say mortal sin, but it's venial, right?
It's a breaking of a promise, but what commandment does it break?
Well, it doesn't matter. It's a breaking of the promise.
That's a priest.
Yeah, as a priest.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just something I promised to do for the rest of my eternity.
But darn
Right.
it, you're human, so.
I know, but that's so what you can say is be better.
That's right.
I also promise to conform my life every day closer and closer to Christ. I fail that every day,
Me too.
right? So that's also matter for the confessional.
As long as we're really trying, we know we're failing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's one of these things where it's that's what a priest promises, and yeah, it's not mortal. We're not saying it's mortal, but it is venial, And I should, I could still receive the Eucharist and everything else, but yeah, I probably should confess that.
Sing the Alleluia.
Mhm.
Okay.
Within the liturgy, and that's also Dixon too. Like that's one of the things the
Probably
kids.
more, though.
Well,
Right.
yeah, the kid. I mean, that's where the kids really get kind of cute because, like, I'll come in to like the classroom during Lent, and we're like, okay, so what do we do during Lent? Well, it's like, well, we don't say the A word. It's hallelujah. It's like, well, wait a minute, wait a second. It's like, okay, what are we talking about here, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
we're not talking about in general. I said, can I use this example? I'm like, let's say you're walking down the street in Lent. You're just having a miserable day. You just blurt out, hallelujah. That could be an act of the Spirit upon you. So is that a sin now? Well, no. Okay, good. What about if you're in the middle of Mass? Right? So it's like, well, yeah, because that's a different circumstance, right? When we're talking about the Alleluia, we're talking about in the context of a liturgy, right? So what is a liturgy? A liturgy is a public celebration that's usually designated for a particular purpose. So it's a public work. So in that respect, Liturgy of the Hours is always directed towards the people that I serve, right? So I always pray Liturgy of the Hours for my parishioners because that's what a pastor does. So by saying Alleluia when I shouldn't, it doesn't invalidate it or make it illicit, but it's just something that I need to be cognizant of as the presider of that. It'd be the same thing if you had a lay presider. So if we had a public Vespers, which we have every Sunday at 4:00, except for this upcoming Sunday. If we had a public Vespers, even a lay person is leading it, they still have to maintain that too. Because that's even people participating should maintain that too, because that is a precept of the church that's given to us, right? And so, yes.
You're doing Vespers every Sunday.
4:00
Where?
for a presentation.
See? I know, book up secret.
Why doesn't anyone know?
I don't know.
It's
We've,
not publicized.
yeah. Yep. We're trying. Yeah.
So will it be while you're gone?
Probably not. We have a priest visiting the weekend of Corpus Christi. He's just celebrating the masses. So Father Vincent might, if you can talk him into it. I'm sure he would like to. Father Vincent's never led Vespers, which is actually very interesting. Apparently in Uganda, the bishop has public Vespers, but none of the priests do.
Interesting.
So, because like when we do it during Lent, he led. So I asked him if he wanted to lead, and he said, "I've never done it before." I'm like, "Oh," and so we had the conversation. So yeah. So the visiting priest might be able to. I don't know, but he's really just here to celebrate the masses and preach.
So do you have any intentions or your plans, not, I don't know if plans is the right word, but for your Spain trip? Something your personal intentions, your
I do. I'm
Along
gonna.
with you?
Yeah, I'm. So obviously, I'm going to be praying every day for the people of St. Anne, family, friends. There's some personal intentions that I'm going to hold in Peccatorum for now, right? Because those are kind of personal discernments. I'm trying to, yeah.
But if we were to want to pray for your intentions,
You just pray
It's like-
personal.
you don't get sunburn.
I appreciate that. Less listeners. I'll be good. Any prayers I can get, I'd be happy to. One nice thing about it is we've been walking, the last few days, and I haven't been sore. I haven't been,
How far have you been walking?
we've been walking about 2-3 miles.
We did it.
Wow.
We did an hour and
Yeah.
40 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I mean, it's been so there hasn't been any big things. I almost broke myself today.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's been. But yeah, no, it's so yeah, right. So far, it hasn't really been anything seriously like not sore, no soreness or anything. So hopefully that kind of keeps on going through the next 2 weeks.
I'm fine.
Do you have to carry your own backpack or the
No,
staff
we have
truck?
yeah.
So you're
Fortunately, we have a
walking with
van
that
that's
carry.
the van's kind of carries us. So we're just it's really just kind of us.
Okay.
One thing I got some insight. I was really kind of thinking about. I was talking to someone who's done it before, and this person is going on the same one, but she has had the experience before. And one thing I was kind of wondering is like they have the hiking poles. So apparently, the hiking poles are provided by the company there.
Oh,
But she was saying, well, the problem was last time they had them, they were all kind of mismatched, and some people didn't, have the support they wanted. But this person also, it's up to you whether you wanted to use them or not. I mean, you can let kind of put it in God's hands, and I think I'm going to more do that because I don't know if I really would need them. It's not like we're hiking up.
I think I take a
Mountains.
backpack those. I have a
Well,
backpack or something.
You
Well,
have to have
we do
gloves.
have like a bag or something we would carry, and that's you can put like water, sunscreen. So that's going to be brought.
Okay.
But like as far as it's not going to be like backpacks or right.
Some people to the Camino and all of their clothes, all their stuff
Right.
is in
Yeah.
there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be like going to like hotels and
Yeah.
stuff, and so it's like
Hostels.
yeah, right. I don't think we're doing hostels. I don't know. I got to look at that. I didn't see a hostel anywhere, but
And then-
maybe.
I think
Um,
Dave did it. He backpacked.
Oh, he did. No, he did. He didn't do it through like he did it on his
He
own,
did it.
right? And that's what I wanted to do,
Impressive.
but they didn't let me do that without a priest going. I was like,
So you have to get your priest ID card.
I got that.
Do all,
Mhm.
you'll do masses,
Mhm.
sacraments.
Yeah,
Mhm.
be in good standing.
Yeah, that's why we were talking about today. I visited the Respect Life Pod, so they were kind of asking about that, and I can't remember what it was. What was it? It was something about how does that work with like people who come from different places or come from different dioceses. I was even saying technically anywhere you go outside, my faculty was only apply inside the archdiocese.
Right.
So if I go anywhere else, even across the river, I gotta get permission.
Right.
Right. And that was actually kind of came in when I first got here, there was a person in our parish who was living in a nursing home, and she got moved over to Belleville. And so it was like, well, Could I come visit you? Sure, but technically I don't have faculties in Belleville to anoint or, hear confessions, especially on a regular basis. If it's like one offers like an emergency, sure. So I had to contact the local parish over there and say, hey, this person was in our parish, they moved over there. I don't know how long they're going to be there, but they're there now. So can you minister them? They said, sure. So good. In the same way, when someone comes here, like when Father Vincent came here to St. Louis, to get the faculties, he had to have a letter of good standing from his diocese. He said he's in good standing with his diocese. There's no, accusations or anything against him when it comes to like, canon law. So yeah, he's good to go.
That's for any priest who's going anywhere.
Any priest, even if a bishop. So like, for instance, when I first got here, I got a call one day from Bishop Rice, who was over anointing people at Mother Council, which is in my jurisdiction. He said, I'm just letting you know I'm doing that. I'm like, do you have a letter of good standing?
Yeah.
He's like, I'll get you one from one. I'm like, this will probably be okay. That's fine. So whatever. So even bishops have to do that stuff, right? Bishop particularly, if they go to a different place, they have to get permission even to wear their mitre and their crozier.
So how's that work in Rome? Like with the conclave?
They also get permission to do that.
Permission from who?
Well, you mean for the conclave or for?
Well, like when they were over there for Francis's.
Right. So that would be, usually it's a tribunal process.
Okay.
But I mean,
Who gives the permission? I
technically
guess?
it's the ordinary,
Okay.
the local ordinary. Now, there could be more than one local ordinary. It's like we have
We have like
six. We have six here in St. Louis.
It doesn't have to be bishop.
Oh, okay.
So an ordinary son is equal in law to a bishop. So we have Archbishop Rosansky, we have Bishop Rivatuso, we have Father Carl Schubel, who's the Vicar General for the Archdiocese. We have Father Scott Jones, who's the Episcopal Vicar. We have Father Mike Leiden, who's the Episcopal Vicar, and we have Monsignor Brockland, who's also Episcopal Vicar. So they are the ordinaries, one would say. So to receive even like delegation for like confirmation. So let's say someone's baptized Catholic, they didn't get confirmed, they get confirmed later in life. Like for instance, so I have to get delegation from a local ordinary to actually celebrate the sacrament for that person. And that would come from Episcopal Vicar or from.
So do you have to get it from where you're coming from? Or where you're going? So like you're going, Camino.
So
do you get it from here or do you get it from here?
Yes. so in other words, what happens, the way it works is I go to my local ordinary, the tribunal. I say, I'm going to these places on these dates, right? I need faculties to do that. They then contact that local ordinary and say, this one's in good standing. Can you grant him faculties? Oh, sure. Okay, here's your letter of suitability saying that you can do that in these areas on those dates, right? So it could be a little extended. You could say like, I'm there for 6 months. Okay, fine, whatever. But wherever you go, you have to get the local ordinary to give you the faculties for that.
A lot of detail.
Yeah, and I mean, it has to be agreement. So let's say like what happens if, let's say, I go through my ordinary, let's say Archbishop Rosanti contacts, let's say, I don't know, Archbishop Supich in Chicago. And I'm going to Chicago to visit my sister. I want to celebrate Mass and hear confessions. Let's say Archbishop Supich says, no, don't want him to do that. Okay. I'm not. He's the bishop. It's his call. It has to be agreement to the bishop for it to happen.
But you can go and do your daily mass privately.
I could, and I can still visit my sister. I can't like barge from the diocese, but I can't celebrate public masses and barring emergency. So emergencies, all bets are off. But outside of that, I can't minister.
Confessions and-
It would be
Anoint.
extremely rare for a bishop to deny.
It would. I mean, there would have to be a really, really serious reason, typically, right? I mean, so it's really more like, yeah, I know this guy personally, and last time he was in my diocese, he didn't do so great. He did
Okay.
something
Okay.
really
In high school,
heinous.
they beat us in football, and don't like that.
Yeah, I don't know if that'd be a good reason.
That
But it-
long-standing grudge
yeah.
that you know as Catholics.
But I mean, but also too, it could be formal. It could be like, for instance, if let's say I went down to Springfield for Steubenville, which is happening next month. I should go through our tribunal process to do that. But also, because I know the ordinary down there well, yeah. I mean, could I call up and say, "Hey, I forgot my whatever. Is this okay?" I mean, that would be really bad, right? Because I don't want to put him in that position. But I think he'd be like, "Yeah, don't do it again."
I remember when I.
Right? I
You.
know. I know. He could too. I don't blame him. But the same way, like he could also say, "Well, you really should do this." I'm like, okay, fine. And they can expedite those things too. It just depends, right? It just depends. So. Great. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. So we are not going to meet next week because I will not be here, and we meet the week after because I will not be here. But we will come back on, I believe it's July 2nd. So that'll be the first Tuesday again. So we'll start with again with Friends, Food, and Faith, and I think we'll talk about
It's the July the
first.
Yeah.
So that's still first Tuesday. We will discuss probably church and state. I think that may be a very fitting.
Oh,
Huh?
I thought you were maybe talking about your kid.
We can do that too. But I mean, it's topic. It's topic
You
driven.
might,
It's
it is a
topic
in
driven.
the sense that you could.
I mean, it's July. I mean, that seems kind of applicable when it comes to church
We
and
could get
state.
them off really easy.
We can do it. We'll see. Maybe we can do a little bit both hand.
not these days.
Well, some might find my exploits over in Spain tomorrow. Who knows? Whatever. So we can maybe do both hand, but I think the topic in general is going to be about church and state. So we'll look at that, and then maybe we can talk about that with Spain because they're flown to it. Okay.
All right.
Thanks for everybody. See you later.
Thank you.